So, hi, Helen. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's nice to have you on.
Yeah. So, Helen Joyce needs little introduction to the people that tune into this channel. But for new viewers, Helen is a mathematician and a journalist. She's worked at The Economist for almost 2 decades. When she started looking into the trends industry for a story in 2017, she couldn't unsee what she discovered. And I know that feeling, resulting in a book that she wrote called Trends: When Ideology Meets Reality, that was published in 2021, which became an immediate bestseller. Helen is now a director at Sex Matters UK, a human rights charity which promotes clarity about sex in law, policy, and language. Helen's brave, calm, common sense voice on this matter has made her a worldwide household name for those who can't unsee what we see. Helen is in New Zealand as a guest of the Women's Rights Party and the Free Speech Union and has been up and down the country holding public meetings and meeting a wide range of people who have followed her work for years. You've also been flat out conducting many interviews, of which this hopefully may be the lucky last, before you speak at the Free Speech Union's conference tomorrow and then head home. So welcome, Helen. Thanks for taking this time to chat at the end of what looks to have been a very, very busy couple of weeks here in New Zealand.
Yeah, it has been, but very, I think, interesting and productive. Hopefully, I've learned a lot. Well, I know I've learned a lot, and hopefully, other people have found it useful too.
Yeah, well, in the world that I'm in, everyone's just really stoked that you've been here. So from that point of view, I want to thank you. So I have so much that I want to talk to you about, and I'm grateful to also have spent some personal time with you over the past week. But what I'm going to do is quick fire some of my top questions to you. Okay. So here goes. The first one's really about the New Zealand situation. So from your time here and listening to many people's stories, what is your overall sense of where New Zealand is at compared to the UK at this time with regards to sex-based human rights?
I mean, in some ways, you're better off, and in some ways, worse. I would say the strong worse would be that you have a conversion therapy law and we don't. And as we all know, conversion therapy bans are actually bans on ethical, evidence-based talking therapy, and they have a serious chilling effect. And they're basically a way of forcing people into affirming gender identity, especially when they think that this might actually be a very bad idea. You have fortunately escaped the hate speech sort of laws that we have, which you're much better off without, which have been a big problem for women trying to speak in rational, sex-based ways. You've got gender self-ID, including for children. That's terrible. You seem to be doing more to sort out your RSE curriculum than we are, though I understand that there may be a lot of devil in that detail. We're not even at that stage yet. It's still terrible. I think that you have a real problem with your courts and your media, and that's a huge issue because we're sorting it out using our courts, and we're getting the message out in the media. Overall, I would say I think you're quite directly 6 years behind us, and that's not a random number of years. I think that the Lava case, the Lesbian Action for Visibility Aotearoa case, is a very direct analogue of my colleague Maya Forstatter's employment tribunal, which she underwent in 2019. So she lost and then had to go to the appeal court to win. And they're about pretty much the same thing, which is, are women allowed to are you allowed to discriminate against women for just bare facts that they state about the two sexes? So Lava wasn't intending to do anything in the way of turfing at this event. It just wanted to talk about lesbian history in Wellington. But they're known to be gender critical, as the word has come to be. And similarly, Maya just wanted to be able to say in work that she thought gender self-ID was a bad idea at a time that the government was consulting on introducing it. Neither of them were talking about individual trans people or anything about sex-based rights as versus trans rights. They were just saying that sex matters. And Maya was deemed to not be worthy of protection from discrimination at work to the extent that she could be fired. And Lava were kicked out of Wellington Pride on that basis. As those seem to me to be very clear analogues to each other, and they're 6 years apart. So if you're 6 years behind us, hopefully in 6 years' time, you'll be where we are now.
Well, it's interesting because I've heard you talk about that, but then, like you said at the beginning there, we have already got the conversion practices prohibition legislation and the name change legislation through the Births, Deaths and Marriages law. So, because you guys haven't got the conversion practices and we're battling with that now, which I interviewed Simon O'Connor recently and he interviewed you, but I had him in studio because he was one of the few MPs that voted against that and he got death threats and things. And so, because that's in, and he talked about it when he was speaking in Parliament at the reading, and he said this is actually about free speech. So they tried to put a hate speech law in back in 2021, I think it was, which didn't go through. But actually, the conversion practices is that it has taken away our ability to have that. So saying that we're 6 years behind, but also we've already got those laws in is really challenging for us, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. It's so much better to avoid a bad law coming in than to have to try to fix it or get rid of it. I mean, I'm picking a figure sort of out of thin air, but it's roughly indicative. I think it takes 20 years to get rid of a law once it's put in. It's just really hard work. Nobody wants to admit they were wrong, and you've got to have everybody who was involved in it way, way, way away from the scene of the crime before you have any chance of even starting to think about that.
Yes, and we're not finding
I
that.
don't think there's been any.
Sorry.
You haven't had any prosecutions, have you, under your conversion therapy ban? Because the purpose is not it's not to prosecute people. It's to chill people.
That's correct.
And I think that's a very interesting fact about a law. Like, if a law just never bites, it probably shouldn't be there at all.
No, and what Simon said, which is true, is that if a criminal activity did happen and how someone was being treated when they were being counselled, that would be under the Crimes Act. So actually you never needed it. So like you say, it had a chilling effect. It has had the effect where good counsellors have ended up having to walk or have been reprimanded for disagreeing with gender ideology. So therefore it is free speech.
And it's very harmful for children.
Very,
You're
very
taking
harmful.
away the choice of what sort of counsellor to see, but you're also ensuring that you only have people who have a very strong ideological conviction dare to counsel children. And that's just inimical to counselling, really. Like, it's bound to be bad counselling.
Yeah. Advice for parents on their increasing awareness. So I help parents see what's going on with sexuality education in schools, DEI policy and the TQ industry at large so that we can find solutions together. So what is your top advice for parents who are aware of all of this?
I mean, if they're aware, then they're already doing the top thing, because so many parents aren't aware. And then when their child is already developing gender issues or is already unhappy or indeed maybe already identifies as trans, like, it comes as a bolt from the blue for those parents. And of course they don't react well. Like, if you haven't been indoctrinated into this ideology, it's so incredibly stupid that you want to just be dismissive when your child says something and you say something like, no, don't be ridiculous. Of course you're not a boy, or, I never heard anything so silly in my life, or, the world has gone mad or something. And I mean, that's just exactly what they've been coached to expect you to say.
Yeah.
That you're hateful and backward and bigoted and so on. So it's already great if somebody's aware. And then, I mean, just to make clear, I don't think that there's anything parents can do to completely protect themselves and their children from this, because it's out there so much. Of course, children who are going through difficulties or who are vulnerable or in families who are in crisis are more likely to be affected. But even kids who are doing great in fantastic families, well supported, it can hit them too, because it's everywhere now. But that said, you can improve your chances by having a very open and respectful modelling of dialogue within your family as a rule, so that your children get to see that people can ask each other questions and not say, oh, just asking questions is a bad thing. That you can ask somebody why they think something without that feeling hateful. And so you can then talk to a child who is saying things that, disturb you a lot about either themselves or just in general about the two sexes. You can say, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that? That isn't how I've ever looked at it. You tell me. And then the child expects that in return, you get a chance to talk about it. And that way, you're trying to stay close together and trying to keep the lines of communication open. But all of that said, there are people who do everything right and it still all blows up in their faces, because there is just so much out there that trains children to interpret just the most ordinary questions as, signs that their parents hate them and want them dead.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess being careful about letting them online and being very vigilant about what's being said in schools. But again, most of us just don't think like that. We thought we trusted the parents or the teachers, I mean, and we didn't know we had to be like that about it, and we don't want to have a row with the child's school. So overall, it's an extremely difficult situation, but my best one is, the A game on the communication front, and start that now. Don't wait for there to be a need for communication.
Yeah, it's almost like encouraging parents to really up their skills in their own communication, nonviolent communication, because that's what we've found is the children being weaponized against us. But then the other side of it is, so you've got what's going on in family and keeping those relationships really strong and healthy is then when the parent is dealing with it, because mainly this is what we do, is deal with parents who are aware and are trying to opt their kids out of class or are trying to not have this stuff shoved down their throat on Pride Week or at Pink Shirt Day, and then what they're coming up against in school. And so we go through policies and we look at the legislation, and we're still losing because of what has been programmed into the teachers. So, I mean, I sort of go, well, the first thing we can do is get comfortable talking about it with each other and finding other people. But you're right, the stuff in the house, like we've got to be very consciously, verbally communicating and connecting with our kids these days.
And be honest with your children about what's worrying you. Like if you think about some other minority groups, like say minority religions, their children may go to schools and be in environments where they are very small minorities all the time and where they believe and maybe have to, do certain practices that are not standard. And those children are in families that talk about why, what their identity is, why they believe what they believe in this house. Other people don't believe the same. The child can bring their identity, as a non-believer or as a different believer into that environment. So, I mean, if kids have to be sitting through lessons about gender identity and you've had a chance to have a really good, open, ongoing conversation with kids about why you find this regressive, why you find it anti-science, why you find it very homophobic, and your child has really understood those and has been able to engage with you, then actually those lessons may well just turn them off more because they're listening and they're seeing the logical flaws and they're seeing the sex stereotypes.
Yes. And you bring up a good point too, because you talk about, minority values, is actually schools shouldn't be educating children on values because that's always through the interpreted lens of what the teacher believes and what the teacher's being told to say. So, we go back to it all the time. We send our kids to school thinking they're going to learn how to read and write and do math and science and learn how to get along. We don't expect them to go to school to learn a particular value at all. So that all of that stuff should be in the classroom, in the home, shouldn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that there's, schools are meant to educate in sort of civic values.
Yes.
I mean, you said the thing about learn how to get along. Like, schools are part of the effort to turn out children who grow into fine adults, meaning people who are good employees, good citizens, good family members, good friends, good parents, etc. And that is, you learn to control your temper, to resolve differences, to have respect for other people, all those sorts of things. And I think schools have known that for decades, but have kind of co-opted that and put into it and also think about the world a certain way.
Yes.
And beyond sort of respect for democratic values and so on.
Yes.
And teachers see that as like they're making the world better one child at a time, and that those children then can educate their parents who are always conceived of as backwards.
Well,
it's such an assumption, when you think of the age that we're at now, like most of the parents of children in school now were already as teenagers in a world where, gay rights was taken as read, where, women's rights were being fought for still. Like they're probably a very progressive generation, the parents, and yet they're being presented to children as absolutely as if they're like 19th century Victorian patriarchs. It's very odd.
Yes, 100% agree with you on that one. That is what's going on. So advice for families when children are already impacted. So I'm sure that you've heard many stories while being here in New Zealand, and obviously when you travel around the world, but specifically for here in New Zealand, of parents being cut out of the picture or overridden by their schools and their medical professionals. And not only that, children, as we're talking about, are encouraged to be oppositional to parents or to disregard them. And we also, as we talked about, have legislation that has removed removed or undermine the rights of parents. So it's a perfect storm, and parents are also being shamed into silence if they don't affirm their child's gender transition. So what advice do you have for families whose children are caught in the web of gender ideology, from everything from it's cool to be kind or be an ally of trans people to those who have children who are already socially or medically transitioning?
I mean, I don't have any magic bullet here. That's an incredibly difficult situation. I mean, you live it and you think about it all the time, and the people you're asking me to advise know it very personally when I don't. I'll just say that the one thing that I have seen that can help, and this depends on already having a really strong and trusting and open relationship with the child, is when you're able to bring them to the point where they see who is thinking about their best interests, and that it's not the lobby groups and it is their parents. So this is actually a story from the UK. It was a friend of a friend who was put in touch with me, because their daughter had started to say she was a boy at school, and the parents hadn't been told. This happens in the UK all the time, even though it's really, really not acceptable, and it's outside the teacher's frame of practice, and it's not the law or anything like that. So they discovered by accident that their daughter had been registered. I think she would have been about 14, 15. She'd been registered as a boy on the school roll for about 18 months at that point. And they found out by accident. The other teachers and the children had been told not to use her preferred pronouns and name in front of the parents and to revert, and somebody forgot. And they had a protracted row at the school, but also they, wanted to talk to the child, and they knew nothing about all of this. So it was a very, very much a crash course. And my advice, talking through what they were doing for their daughter, like they were contemplating going along with pronouns, name change, haircut, totally new uniform, and breast binder. And out of those, I said to them, the breast binder is an immediate risk. Like, in safeguarding terms, that's the most immediate thing, and they should do everything they can to stop that. The hair and the clothes, they're a well-off family, that's fine. Name, I would be quite flexible about a name myself. I know some people feel very, very precious about the child's name, like maybe it's after a beloved grandmother or something like that, and it is the name you gave your child. But I also do understand the impulse to change one's name. And the pronouns is really difficult because that cements the identity more than anything else. But anyway, we agreed, after talking about this child for a while, that the thing should be to say, look, we're open to a lot, but the breast binder is really an issue. And I sent her some research about some research about breast binders. And so she talked to her daughter about that. And her daughter was actually extremely upset because she had thought they were completely safe. And she quite willingly accepted her mother's explanation that these were not safe and that she couldn't allow it. And that she said to her daughter what I advised her to say, which was, we'll go shopping for a really well-fitting sports bras, really as minimizing as it's possible to be without them being unsafe, and a nice new uniform. We'll get you the haircut you want, not uniform, nice new outfits. And, that started a lot of conversations. And then her daughter one day said to her, why did the particular trans lobby groups, I think it was Mermaids and Stonewall, why did they say that breast binders aren't safe when they are safe when they aren't? And her mum said to her, well, who do you think has your best interests at heart? Mm. And that was the start of this girl realizing that she was being, talked to by people who didn't actually care about her and her well-being. And it started the distrust of those lobby groups and everything they said, and reinforced for her that her parents only wanted the best for her. And actually, it took sort of a long time more, and they had some great conversations about sexist stereotypes, and, and in the end, her daughter came back to her and said, the more I think about this, the more I think this idea of identifying as a boy because I'm not like a girl is just so sexist. And her mum was telling me this, and she was like, my God, like, that's literally the first thing I said to her.
Yeah.
But, nobody changes other people's minds. People change their own minds. So I actually think in a way they came out of it stronger than before. And of course, I'm not trying to contrast this with people whose children have medicalized or have cut off contact. Like, this is a really mild story. And the family came out of it stronger, but of course with radical distrust of institutions. Like, they don't trust the school, the doctors, social workers, the government, anybody now. Yeah. And that's a very painful experience we've all been through. Like, you lose your faith in things you thought worked.
Yeah, that was an amazing answer, because it comes back to what we were talking about. It's about that communication and rebuilding the trust, because a lot of parents don't realise until it hits them that the trust has already been broken beyond what they realize, because the kids have had this messaging, like you said, the parents know nothing, the parents won't understand, the parents won't affirm you. So yeah, people will take that and hear that, I think, because like you say, I would say parents would be upset about the surface things, because they don't want, the things like, oh my gosh, they're dressing as a boy, or oh my gosh, they cut their hair off. But you've just nailed it. You've gone back to the actual medical safety and having that intelligent conversation with your child. The other thing that I noticed, like at the end of last year, was, at Christmas holidays, so we have our summer holidays in the Christmas, so everything shuts down for 6 weeks. Where are all the gender clinics and all of the support people for these people? Meanwhile, these children have been spat out of the school system or that system, and they're off to have their summer holidays. So if they have a meltdown out there, who's there? And it's mum and dad. Mum and dad are the ones that are there for you 24/7,
Yeah. Yeah. And it really makes a mockery of not telling the parents, like these parents, when they went up to the school, like they had raised merry hell at school, and they discovered that this had happened to other parents at the same school. And actually the school, somebody incautiously said that about 10% of the children on roll were not registered as their birth sex. And we know that that's going to be more girls than boys. It's a mixed sex school. This is a state school, by the way. This is not some posh school anywhere. Anything up to about 20% or approaching 20% of the girls in that school regard themselves as not girls. And so the reason they were told that they weren't told about their child's trans identification was supposedly a safeguarding, that it was a safeguarding risk to tell the parents. So they just asked the kid, do you think, I don't know what the words they used were, like, is it safe to tell your parents, or do you want to tell your parents? But the thing is that at the same time, they're saying they have to affirm because there's a suicide risk. But where is the child going to try to harm themselves? It's not going to be in school. It's going to be at home.
Yeah.
So it's just the most basic consideration. If you genuinely have a worry that a child is suicidal or is having suicidal ideation, you must tell the people who are there with them at night
100%.
and over the weekend.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. It makes me think they don't really believe it. They just haven't joined the dots. They just think like each thing, oh, this child's at risk of suicide if we tell the parents, so we won't tell the parents. We must affirm, because it just, like, none of it adds up.
No, well, I've even seen a message from a counsellor who counsels in the space, counsels all the gender dysphoric children, who actually asked someone to take something down offline who was questioning it and putting facts up about it, saying it's people like you that are the reason that I've seen 5 of our kids get buried this year. They genuinely think, or have led to believe, that the people out there speaking the truth are the ones making these kids suicide. It's very dark. I think, just going back to what you said about 20% of the girls in that school, I believe what needs to be done is research on in the schools where that's proportionately not, like, way far from natural. We need to look at who's in that school from a teaching educational point of view and which agencies go in, because there will be a direct correlation between how into it the counsellors and the sex ed staff are versus how many kids come out, which then proves that it's not a natural thing. It's something that is environmental, depending on who's in that school, right? So I just want to move on to the puberty blocker conversation now. So as you know, here in New Zealand, puberty blockers are still being prescribed, and our Ministry of Health is showing no signs of outlawing them like in the UK. Lobby groups and even politicians are putting pressure on the government to keep them and make them even more accessible. So what strategies would you focus on if you were in our position?
I think that at this point in time, there are a significant number of people who are worried about puberty blockers, like people who haven't spoken about them up till now. If you think about politicians and policymakers, they're thinking about a lot of different things. Like, even if you've got a particular portfolio like mental health, there's a lot in that, and puberty blockers and child gender medicine will just be one part of it. And naturally enough, you're going to think that the people who are the specialists in it know what they're talking about, and you'll take their read on things. And that's what they've been doing. I mean, that's why they believed that puberty blockers were safe and reversible, because they were told they were by people who should know. But they have started to worry. There's enough out there, the CAS review, the fact that the UK has stopped them, the fact that Finland and Sweden are dialing back. And so even people who are a bit disengaged and not knowledgeable are starting to think, like, is this right? Are these things right? So I think it's a very good strategic moment to be messaging on puberty blockers. And the two things that I would want to say to somebody now, assuming that they are not entirely propagandized, but that they're also, inclined to trust the gender clinics and the trans lobby, the two things are: one, we now know for certain that puberty blockers cause significant physical harms, and we can be pretty certain that they don't offer any benefits of the sort that was claimed. So the significant harms, I mean, very obviously they stop puberty, and that's an issue. It's going to cause difficulties for brain development and then specific other bits of development like the genitals, the reproductive organs, the bones. That was never in question. That was the purpose of them. But there's more and more reason to think that those problems are ongoing. So that's the first thing. They're physically very harmful. What was on the other side of that? It was meant to be that they improve gender dysphoria, that they improve functioning, that they make people better. That really doesn't seem to be true. The research has been done, or some research has been done, and there's, to say the least, nothing to support that contention, and more reason to disbelieve it. But the final thing is that they are supposed to be a tool in suicide prevention. And that we now know is false. We have really good studies now out from Europe. In particular, the most recent one is from Finland, where they were able to do a very high quality study with all the records of people who have taken puberty blockers, and they matched them to a large control set because they've got excellent health records in Finland, and they have a population register and only 2 gender clinics that are prescribing them. And they have really, as conclusively as medical research can ever be, they've shown that there's no excess suicidality or suicide in gender distressed children compared with kids with the same other vulnerabilities. So the kids that go into the clinics tend to have a lot of other vulnerabilities, and those can raise the risk of suicidality. But when you wash those out, there's nothing left for the gender distress. And this should be amazing news. Like, the way I would present that to somebody is to say, like, really great news. These obviously dangerous and risky, untested, unlicensed drugs really don't need to be given to children, because the only reason that you would consider doing that is you're so terrified the child will kill themselves if you don't give them to the child. We now know that's just not true.
Yeah.
The suicide thing is a myth. So everybody should be delighted about this. Actually, the trans lobby groups should be delighted about it too. I mean, who wants to give your target group, the group that you're meant to represent, powerful drugs that are known to have very, very serious physical side effects?
Yeah.
Like, they should be the ones saying this. And I keep coming back to this idea of undermining people's trust in these groups as good actors. As with that girl saying to her mum, why did they say that breast binders were safe when she's now convinced they're not? Like, to say to the politician, why are you listening to these people who want you to be giving these drugs to children they claim to care about, when the evidence really now is that those drugs are dangerous and not efficacious?
Well, yeah, and I sort of say now, I think when people ask me, are we winning this? I think, well, actually, the more that they keep banging on using their narrative, the more that they're doing the work for us in a way, because they're just, the wheels are coming off their theories. And like you say, if now that science is out, they should be grateful to know that their at-risk children are not. The other thing I find fascinating is with regards to puberty blocker research, and obviously there's the CAS report, and then there's this new report from Finland. International research and results is relevant here if we were to present it. And this far, the government hasn't wanted to look at the CAS report and things like that. But on the flip side, the Ministry of Education uses international resources to assist with their sex education. So, I just did an Official Information Act to the MOE and said, with the new sex ed stuff, where did you go to get your help? And they listed a bunch of countries that they were getting it from. So they were getting international advice. They were all countries that were using critical pedagogy, which is very concerning. So when it comes to the Ministry of Education doing that, they say it's great to go overseas. But on the puberty blocker issue, where we've got great overseas data, they don't want to know.
And I mean, the whole puberty blockers experiment came from the Netherlands and then went off to the US. So it's imported anyway.
Yeah.
The bad evidence, the nonsense that says that these things are important and a first line of, that they should be a first line treatment for gender distressed children, that's from the American Association of Pediatrics, and it's baseless. Like, if you look at the position paper that they wrote in 2018, the citations simply don't back up the conclusions. So they've imported puberty blocker use, and now they're saying, foreign evidence isn't worth looking at.
Yeah.
Like, there was only foreign evidence, I mean, rubbish evidence, fake evidence for using them in the first place. And anyway, puberty's the same everywhere. I don't think that Kiwi children have a different puberty than children in Europe.
Exactly. And I mean, we didn't suddenly change. So I just want to move on now to the media, which is a space where you have a lot of experience. So as a journalist and advocate for using correct words in conversation, policy and law, I want to ask you, I can see how the mainstream media is the agent of change. So it's used to shift people's thoughts and beliefs through specific word use, repetition, and narrative, such as anti-trans. So they keep saying anti-trans, but they never say pro-biology or pro-sex-based rights, do they? So what are your thoughts on this? And can we recover from this adjustment in the collective consciousness that has been pushed on us via the media? And if so, what will it take?
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand feels very similar to Ireland for me in many ways. I mean, it's a very similar sized population, though, of course, Ireland is physically far smaller. And the media is so homogeneous and so captured by elite opinion in both countries. But more so here, I would say, than in Ireland, you've got a really thriving alternative new media. Like, I was dead impressed by the numbers of people who get emails from Reality Check Radio and from the Free Speech Union. There's nothing in Ireland like that. There's one new publication, Gript, which does very well, but there isn't this thriving ecosystem of new sources. And that, I think, is a huge bright spot here, because the numbers are at a point where they're actually a force to be reckoned with now. And so it's both about people getting the message from these new sources, but it's also about politicians realizing that these news sources matter. Like, if you say to a politician, our weekly newsletter goes out to 100,000 or 200,000 people in a country the size of New Zealand, politicians want to know what you're saying. They want you to be saying good things about them. And they actually want to engage with you. So you're already at the point that you can be doing that. And then, it becomes a bit less important what the mainstream media are saying and doing. Like, it still matters, of course it does, and you have to keep trying. But it's less important. And it's a bit like what you said about how the trans lobby groups do our work for us. Like, we call this Operation Let Them Speak in the UK. Like, whenever one of them puts up a sign calling women the C word or saying that we should all be hanged or whatever, like, that's much more powerful than anything I can say on my side, I mean. And when people see that gap between what the old media or the traditional media are saying and doing, and how different it looks from the way the country is, that weakens trust. And I gather trust is very low in journalism here in New Zealand. And then there's these news sources, and in a way, that's an accelerating dynamic that works in our favour. It's a real shame because, this involves what should be respectable outlets destroying their own brand. I mean, this is absolutely happening in the UK. The BBC's brand is being destroyed by the BBC. There's a new report out just now, a leaked internal memo that says just how biased their coverage has been of a few issues, but in particular the trans issue. And it just gives chapter and verse examples, and all of us in Turfland know it. But now everybody can see it, and it's been said within the BBC, and they're doing nothing about it. So I feel, it doesn't happen by getting people who are thoroughly destroyed back to reality, because I just don't know how easy that is or how possible. It comes from repeatedly saying, look, here we are in New Zealand prescribing puberty blockers at or near the highest rate in the world, while other countries that we know are progressive, we know have good science, have stopped doing this. You're not hearing a word of it in the national broadcaster or on the broadsheets. We're telling you about that. Who do you believe? Who do you trust?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that BBC whistleblower article that dropped just yesterday. So can you tell a little bit more about that? Because I think you responded to it on X. So what was the story there?
Yeah, so it turns out that there was an internal memo from a whistleblower, like an internal whistleblower, saying we've got this badly wrong. The BBC has a statutory duty to be impartial, and we are not impartial on this topic in our language choice, in our story choice, in the framing of stories. So, examples it gave included that nearly all the stories that it mentioned about the disgraced Tavistock Gender Clinic were actually about how long the waiting lists had been there. which just reminds me, that joke, like the food was terrible and there wasn't enough of it.
Mm.
Very much that. They turned down the WPATH files when they were offered them. They didn't even want a briefing on it. And this was big news, not just in the UK, but in lots of other countries. The BBC didn't cover it. They're completely obsessed with drag queens. I've never seen anything like it. My theory is that when they bought RuPaul's Drag Race in 2019, an edict went out to puff it up because it was an expensive purchase. And they're very like they're very like sort of tractor factories in old Soviet Union, Like the Politburo says, turn out these tractors, my comrade. And the order is never countermanded, so they obediently keep turning out tractors. And they have stories about drag queens like literally nearly every day. What do drag queens think of inflation? Here's a drag queen who has decided to have an eco funeral. Like, I made the second one up, not the first one.
Yeah.
You would think that they were 60% of the UK population sometimes, instead of being an incredibly tiny minority. Anyways, this report detailed all of these sorts of things and gave lots of chapter and verse examples and said, we've got this wrong. And then amazingly, the day after it's published, they upheld complaints about a presenter called Martine Croxall, who had to read out a story that said pregnant people. And it was on the chyron below, and she read it, and she clearly changed it as she saw pregnant people. She said something like pregnant people, and then she gave a bit of an eye roll, and she said, I mean women. I think I've got that about right. But anyway, the clip is available. And she was censured for that. She was told that the facial expression didn't show the necessary impartiality. But I mean, I've been occasionally on a BBC show and it's been so partial.
Yeah.
Like every time I say something like that men can't be women, they're like, oh, well, some people, of course, will find that offensive. Some listeners will find that offensive. And on the same show, 2 days earlier, they have a man who says he's a woman and they didn't say, and some listeners will find that very offensive.
Yeah.
And they do. I mean, they absolutely do find it offensive.
Yes, but we're not allowed to say that. Well, that's what's interesting with the media. Why I asked you about the media is the weapon or the tool in which to shift the conversation. Because so Project Syndicate is something that I only found out about recently, and it was actually from the Natural Women's Council, which is from Ireland, which is Jana London and Eugene Garvin, who are friends of mine, and they did a YouTube on Project Syndicate, and Eugene did a really good way of explaining the framing, which is what you talk about. So for Project Syndicate, it's a global news agency where people, other agencies just buy their news for cheap, right? So they write the stories for them. But what he said was they have their framing, which you take. So he says, for example, instead of a news article saying there has been a devastating flood in Argentina, it'll say there has been a devastating flood in Argentina caused by climate change. So they put the framing around it. And so when it comes to all of this stuff in the LGBTQI space, that's what they do too. So we had a story here recently, unfortunately, where a young lady, you would have probably heard about her as you're travelling around, called Vanessa, who was a teen who was in state care. Who had multiple mental health issues and suffered from anorexia, and also she was suffering from gender dysphoria, and she passed away in a hotel room alone. The mainstream media stories that ran on that, they said that she died because of her gender dysphoria and that her parents didn't support her gender identity. So they spun it with their own framing, far away from the facts of the case. Now, that's the mainstream media. So the father himself went out and put a press release saying what was actually going on. This is the harm of the mainstream media, and hopefully it is destroying itself as more and more people, because New Zealand's a small country. We've only got 5 million people, so it shouldn't take forever for us to realise that what we're watching in front of our own eyes is different to what ends up on the 6 o'clock news.
I mean, again, I think Ireland's ahead of you on that. And the main issue is not gender there, it is immigration. And I should say, I really don't want to express an opinion on immigration policy myself. I'm speaking here now as a journalist, and the first duty of a journalist is to be accurate about what is happening.
Yeah.
And that means not just being accurate when you've decided what you're writing about, but not leaving good stories sitting on the table. Like, it's not up to the journalist to say, are people going to think the right thing about this story?
Yeah.
If I write this, are people going to have bad opinions about it? I wish this wasn't happening, so if I don't write it, then nobody will know, and it's like it isn't happening, which is an incredibly childish way to think about it. It's just, there's a big story here. I go along, I do my best in the time available to me, because this is just the first draft of history. I put it out there, I move on to the next story.
Yeah.
So with that framing, the fact that Ireland has experienced, an extraordinary influx of migration. Now, Ireland was such a homogeneous country when I was a child that I literally never saw a black person in real life until I was 14, when I visited London for the first time. Literally the only foreigners were the occasional English person or some Irish people who had lived in England and came back. That was it. I went to a large secondary school for girls, and there were, I think, 2 or 3 girls in that entire school who were not Irish Catholic, and they were still Christian. I think there was one atheist, like one girl who was excused RE lessons in the entire school. So we went from being an incredibly homogeneous country, like almost far north of Finland level of homogeneous, to now having this enormous influx, much larger than anywhere else in the EU per capita. And it happened incredibly fast. That's just a fascinating news story. What is that doing? What's it doing to housing? What's it doing to healthcare provision?
Yeah.
How much is this costing? What are the benefits? What are the harms? Do people like it? What are they saying about it? None of those stories are in the mainstream media. It's as if it's not even happening.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's very visible, because you can see who's an immigrant in a very white country. Like, because we're talking about people who come from who are dark skinned, so you can actually just see them.
Yeah.
And there's a really weird disconnect when you can see things and they're not in the media, they're not reflected at all. And some of it's like, they had camps on, like tent camps, because they had run out of accommodation for asylum seekers. And they're there, like they're right next to your child's school. You're walking to your child to school and it's there. And it's as if it doesn't exist on the national broadcaster and in the main broadsheets. So this has caused a really rapid sense of disillusionment with the government and with the media. And that is coming out now in voting behaviour and in polling about trust.
Yeah.
So, yes. But then, then everything that RTE, which is our state broadcaster, or the Irish Times, which is our main broadsheet, say, everything then comes into question, even though there's some great reporters there and they're doing some good work, of course. Yeah. So they're trashing their brand by refusing to talk about this thing. But the point from our point of view, as people thinking about their effect on the sex and gender debate, is that this radical mistrust just kind of eats away with everything. Like, people will read these stories and think, I just don't believe it.
No.
They're saying a woman, raped and murdered somebody. I just don't believe it. Mm. It's very dangerous, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, well, and on that, because obviously the media is captured into what it can say, but how people get trained to go into journalism is part of it too, right? Because that's completely changed. But what I want to just briefly talk about is, and this is a global organisation, I think Women in Film and Television, but Women in Film and Television in New Zealand, so WIFT, this is where the problem gets systemic, because it's an organisation that was set up to ensure that women are safe in the industry of film and television. But when you go to their website now, when you go to join on the membership page, it says that the membership is for any woman or a person identifying as a woman. So is it that bad in the UK is my question. But the other side of it is, how on earth are we, to me, I'm like, we just have to watch the mainstream media fall on its own sword here, because the very people in there are not protecting women or women's, policies or rights or spaces anymore. That's Women in Film and Television. So that on our mainstream channels now, the channels are full of anything except heterosexual looking. Lots of stuff, like you say, about drag queens, men having babies. That's the programming. So it's connected.
Yeah, it's the same in the UK. Absolutely the same. I mean, nearly everything that's been set up ever for women now is women, and then somewhere in brackets it'll say in all their diversity, including trans women. Yeah. And they always do this thing of like, in all their diversity, gender non-conforming, lesbian, migrant, trans. You're like, one of those things is not like the others. Like, one of them is redundant. Lots of them are redundant. I mean, women covers lesbians, women covers migrant women, it covers women of colour, it covers all those things. Yeah. But trans women are not women.
Well, that's exactly it.
No, that absolutely has happened.
Yeah, and that's why they do this micro-categorising, right? So that people get used to the categorisation of all the things and then they slip it in, because really all of the WIFT membership needs to say is for any woman. Full stop. Because like you say, it doesn't matter if it's a black woman, white woman, big woman, small woman, old woman, young woman, or lesbian or straight. It's women. That we don't need to categorise, discriminate. So people need to know that that's how it's systemic through policy.
And it's really clear that it's it's young women who are keener on this ideology than anyone
Yes.
else. And, maybe that's a bigger conversation than we could have in this particular, chat. I do have theories as to why this is. But I mean, that's one of the reasons why this goes unnoticed, because young women will say, they want it that way. And in the UK now, anything that you set up as a positive action for women actually has to target women. It can't target that mixed sex group because that's not lawful. See, it's discrimination.
Yeah.
Like anything where you say this is just for one group is, in the neutral meaning, discrimination. And sex discrimination is unlawful unless expressly allowed for.
Yeah.
Like direct sex discrimination is unlawful except when expressly allowed for in the UK. So you can't target it on a group that you haven't got an express permission to do so. And one of the express permissions is what we call positive action. I think in America it's called positive discrimination. So you can target a group, and that doesn't have to just be women. It could be men, it could be a racial category, it could be a religion, if there's a reason to do so that it promotes equality. If you recognise that, young white boys are doing worse than other kids in school, you might do a reading programme just for them. But you can't target this mixed sex weird group. You could target real women, actual women, and then also have a programme for trans people. That'd be completely fine. But you can't exclude the women who don't identify as women and include the men who do. That's just not a category that can be a positive action category. And this has been established by the courts. It was established before the Four Women Scotland case. It was established in a previous case in a Scottish precedent-setting court. So there's no question about it, but it's continuing. We write to people and we tell them this, and they just ignore us. Because the thing is, it's the law, but there's nobody to sue about it. There's no one to take the case, I mean. I think they'll drop these programs rather than fix them.
Well, it's interesting. As you're talking there, all I can think is the dollar signs in the legal industry, right? Because they're all winning out of it. So, and I spoke recently at the New Zealand First, which is one of the political parties' conference, that the law firms here in New Zealand sign up to something called the Gender Equality Charter, but it's not what it sounds like. It's not equality. They're doing it under the auspices of saying, fair pay for women. That's not what this is. This is letting it in the back door. And I don't know that we will find many lawyers that would take on a case on our side of things,
Yeah, that Ireland has exactly the same problem. The size issue is really a serious one.
Yeah.
Quite often, at first especially, it was very hard to find any lawyer in the UK who was, in the right field, specialised enough, had the fire in the belly that they need, willing to take the risk. And now it's got a bit easier because we're winning, and lawyers like to win, and they like to see that they're on the side that the Supreme Court has ruled on, and that, like some lawyers. But in Ireland, that hasn't got off the ground. My friends there are literally not able to find anyone to represent them, and anyone to stand up for them in court.
Yeah. I think
it's a small profession in a small country, and nobody wants to lose all the rest of their connections and contacts.
That's right, and it's hyper-specialised, isn't it? I know we're running out of time. I just want to ask one more question, and that is, can you explain, and I heard you talking about it when you're travelling around, about the scene groups, and try and, because let's talk about some solutions for people that are in this space. So, yeah, tell me about them. I just actually found one when I was looking up this BBC case, and I found Scene in Journalism has a Substack. So, yeah, just share about that.
Yeah, it's really good. So SEEN, and I don't know why they chose the particular acronym they did. It's sex equality and equity, and people often say, "Oh, I don't like that word equity." I'm sure they were retrofitting the word seen so that they could say seen in, like visibility. So what happened was Maya Forstatter, my colleague, who's our CEO at Sex Matters, she's often contacted, ever since she took her precedent-setting case, by people who want to tell her their workplace stories or ask for advice. And quite frequently they were civil servants. So she would take, contacts, and then at some point she had enough of them that it was worth asking if she could put them in touch with each other. And then she said, let's have a dinner to talk about what to do. This might be like 2 years ago, I want to say. And on the day of the dinner, they disinvited her, because, they have a statutory duty of impartiality, and having her there wasn't right. So they just met without her, which I thought was hilarious. And at that, they decided that what they needed was a network. And they do things like, use the impartiality rules of the civil service to push back against the policy capture by the LGBT networks and the like. So if the LGBT network gets something, they say they want it. If there's a policy input from the LGBT network, they give one too. They've sought recognition and got it from the civil service as an affinity group. And it's very civil servicey, it's because that's the field that it's in, and it's there, and you can join. You have to be vetted, obviously, and they support each other, but also they're becoming a unified voice that can represent a certain point of view that has been ignored for far too long. And then other sectors decided they wanted to do something similar. And again, I want to say about a year ago, we hosted a meeting of representatives from more than a dozen scene networks, like Scene in Publishing, Scene in HR, Scene in local councils, journalism. Who else was there? The
Medical?
arts, I think it was.
Medical?
Sorry?
Medical? Was there one?
I think there was. I
Yeah.
can't remember. There was in teaching. And what we realised, I mean, there were lots of things. I mean, mostly we were just facilitating it. They were talking to each other. It was a great day. But different sectors will have very different things they can do. So if you're in publishing, it's a very freelance heavy industry. And especially if you're an author or an editor or a copy editor or anything like that, like you will just lose all your work if you're out on this. So they took a different approach. They have a few people who are willing to be the face of it. The other people are more anonymous or just help. And then they commissioned a very good report about the silencing of gender critical voices. Actually, we helped them to do that. And it's a woman that we worked with before who wrote it. So that's what they're doing. They're focusing on media strategy rather than trying to make a sort of a large membership group. And there's no employer to lobby, if you know what I mean. And then for teachers, teaching is such a cottage industry. You're in your own classroom, and you don't see other people when you're teaching, and they don't see you. But they do also have rights that are more similar to those of civil servants and less like those in publishing. I'm not actually sure what their strategy is, but we encourage them at the end of the day to think about it in your industry. What's the most useful thing you could do to shift things? Journalism, it's a very person-person network thing, but this Substack is great, and it's really examining the bias in journalism itself, like the output is what they've landed on. And the Substack you mentioned is part of that, but their Twitter account is also excellent.
Yeah.
It tends to track stories that are gender identity stories that shouldn't even be news, or stories when a trans woman is called a woman, or, the subtle bias and framing that gets you, the Tavistock Clinic was all just about too long waiting lists, that sort of thing. And so, I highly recommend it as a model, as long as it's done in a very intentional way.
Yeah.
You can do it in different industries, but what are your legal protections in that industry? Like civil servants are very well protected as long as they're demonstrating impartiality. Publishing professionals, absolutely not at all. What do you think is the lever, the best lever to pull in that sector? And can you do that? Is it tweeting? Is it commissioning research? Is it forming a network to lobby your employer? Whatever,
Different in each sector. So are the scene groups international, or do you recommend that if people are interested in that they start them up inside of our own country because it's specific?
I think it probably has to be national. I mean, You can do what you like. Like nobody has bookmarked this name or has.
It's a great concept.
This name. Yeah. And people just sort of popped up. Like there were two guys who turned up to that meeting, if I remember correctly, from a council. And at the end of it, they said, right, we've got to do scene in local government.
Totally.
Like, there's nobody stopping you. You just do it.
Just do it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially if you are part of a little cluster, a mini cluster, like if there's you and a few similar people in your sector that feel the same, and you're maybe in a little WhatsApp group and bitching, set up the Twitter account.
Yeah.
And start and just dip your toe and think, what could we do? And start talking to people. And then people will start getting in touch with you.
Yeah.
And be very careful about that. Like be really, really careful about recruiting people you don't know.
Yeah.
But then you start to become a kind of an agglomerator.
Yeah.
And things can take off.
Yeah. I think that's a really nice thing to finish on, because we talk about such hard things, and I really want to have solutions and get people to be motivated to actually take an action themselves and stop looking around thinking someone else is going to fix it. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Where can people find you, Helen?
I have a website, thehelenjoyce.com, and I tweet at @hjoycegender. But if you search my name, you'll probably just find those things anyway. And lots and lots and lots of podcast videos.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you've kind of flooded the independent media network here as well. And also at sex-matters.org is your organisation that you work for. Is that right? Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a UK-based organisation, but any country with a legal system that's based on the UK will find a lot that's useful there. And even if yours isn't, like a lot of it isn't legal. It's just biology or news or whatever. But yeah, I mean, our focus is primarily fixing the law And our main tool that we use is the law alongside political engagement and media engagement.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Helen. On behalf of myself and the families that I connect with and the Let Kids Be Kids community throughout New Zealand, I'd like to thank you for coming all the way down under and for smiling through your really intense schedule. I travel too and I know what it's like, but yours looks next level. So it's been wonderful and I've really appreciated personally spending time getting to know you, and I've picked up so many more tools and advice from you. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been great to talk.
Thank you.